I think I'll take a few minutes to read the more layperson-friendly short version of from one of my favorite books that we've looked at before in the way past, but I like referring to it. It's The Beginner's Guide to Insight Meditation from Arinna, Wiseman, and Jean Smith. And it's been reprinted many times, so now it has a red front. Didn't used to have a red front. And in talking about the third foundation, which we sort of summarize the third and the fourth together because they blend together. But in the third foundation of mindfulness, the mind factors, another area of experience is what we call the world of emotions, and the Buddha called the 52 mental factors of qualities. Skillful factors include faith, mindfulness, fear of wrong, generosity, loving kindness, equanimity, tranquility, lightness of body, and consciousness, wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood, compassion, appreciative joy, and wisdom. And so cultivating these qualities is a deliberate practice that enables us to let go of envy and avarice and delusion and hatred. And among the 14 unskillful energies are 3 that are almost always present when we experience suffering. Delusion, or mental blindness to what brings us suffering and causes unwise attention. Fearlessness, or not understanding the consequences of harmful actions. Speech or thoughts, restlessness, especially compulsive planning. Other factors that bring us suffering include greed, conceit, hatred, envy, avarice, worry, sloth and torpor, and doubt, some of which they already talked about in some previous chapters. Because we're on a spiritual path, practicing does not mean that we should not experience unskillful factors when they arise. For example, if we are feeling agitated, we need to recognize the agitation as agitation, and to know the experience of agitation and to relate to it as a friend. Oh, agitation, I see you again. The process of being mindful sometimes takes courage and commitment because it is often easier to repress unskillful factors than to feel them. But the purification of our hearts and minds comes about only through opening up to the experience of whatever is arising. It is critical in this process not to get involved in the storyline around the mental factors that arise. Jean gives an example. After the painful breakup of a long-term relationship, I felt like one big roiling ball of unskillful mind factors. They seemed to come up worse for me at night, so I kept my meditation cushion on the bed. When they clobbered me, I would roll over and sit on my cushion. I said to myself, no plots, just the emotions. Oh, it's grief. What does grief feel like? It's really hot. It's burning at the bottom of my throat. I feel like there is a sumo wrestler sitting on my chest. After a few minutes of intimately knowing grief, I would find that it had lessened, and I could bring my awareness to my breathing. After a while, we begin to see that the grief is not just our grief, that grief is a universal phenomenon, like wind, which sometimes moves into hurricane force, or like breath. Seeing grief as something experienced universally can help us bring ourselves into a more balanced relationship to the experience. As we see each mental factor arising and passing away, we begin to see their impermanence. That feeling of being hooked into them starts to disintegrate, and we are freer of the storminess of their energies. The fourth foundation, mind objects, the Buddha invited us to examine the core teachings of the Dharma. There's reference to the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness or remorse, and doubt. So we're seeing these mind objects. The 5 aggregates of material form and feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. The 6 sense bases, like where we let everything come into us from the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. It includes the 7 factors of enlightenment: mindfulness, investigation, effort, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And it also includes the 4 noble truths: suffering and the origin of suffering, cessation and the way leading to it. And so the Buddha encouraged us to investigate our experience using these foundational parts of the teachings. For example, we might explore ill will when we're washing dishes late at night and find ourselves becoming irritable and having such thoughts as, how come I'm always doing the dishes? It's not fair. The more we think about it, the more irritable we become. The 4th foundation of mindfulness shows how we can investigate the contents of our mind with bare attention and see ill will as an unskillful mental quality, one of the hindrances. We can go further and ask ourselves, with the mental factor of investigation, what the conditions are that give rise to this ill will, and can see that we are very tired and needed to be in bed hours ago. And when we bring this general understanding to our situation, the ill will eases until it disappears, and we can then cultivate equanimity. We are aware that the qualities of bare attention, investigation, and equanimity are now present in our minds. But we also know that they disappear in the next moment because we're back into whatever irritable thoughts might have been there, and we notice that too. And so these ways of working with the 4th foundation, one of them can be to select one thing, like one of the 5 aggregates of the body or feelings or perception or emotions, thoughts, consciousness, and then contemplate it in the meditation practice. And so included in that 4th foundation are areas that we can, consider focusing on. Sometimes it's suggested, like we talked about last Sunday, that we look at the paramis, or we might want to choose one of the 7 factors of enlightenment, that as we become increasingly aware of our mind states, we can begin to discern what factors are arising and where there might be an imbalance, and then the cultivating, like when the mind is tired, we can cultivate energy or effort. So we can notice that the hindering state of tiredness is there, and if we are noticing mindfulness of mental objects, mindfulness of the mind states, we can notice that, and then if we have a few tools, we can encourage, just enough energy, just enough effort. Or when the mind is excited, we know that we can calm it down. So the factors of enlightenment are an expression of the mind in balance, and they are included in that mindfulness of mind in this 7th step on the path of right mindfulness. And then she goes into the 7 factors of enlightenment and gives brief descriptions of what they are. And so does Bhante Ji in the book that we've been looking at. But rather than go into the 7 factors of enlightenment here and now, I think it would be good to refer to some of the key points that Bhante Ji talks about for practice of skillful mindfulness. And we've sort of looked at some of these things, but mindfulness is paying attention moment to moment and attention to what is. And so a mindful mind is precise and penetrating and balanced and uncluttered. It's like a mirror that reflects without the distortion of what stands before it. And mindfulness grants us insight into the 3 characteristics. This is what we look at every time we meditate: the impermanence, the dissatisfaction, the non-existence of eternal or unchanging, self. And we can use any object to further our mindfulness as long as it helps us gain insight into those 3 characteristics. And this deep purpose of mindfulness is to open the eye of wisdom for insight into this true nature of reality, the ultimate secret of lasting peace and happiness. And these 4 foundations of mindfulness are mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of mental objects, which is where we've been the last few weeks. The 3 essential practices of mindfulness of the body are mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the body, and mindfulness of posture, sitting, walking, standing, lying down, mindfulness of the parts of the body. And mindfulness of the breath can help us learn to focus because the breath is easy to observe and it's always present. And as we unite the mind with the breath and it puts the mind into the present moment, the breath also functions as that home base that we can return to after investigating whatever else might be happening. And, walking slowly and mindfully can be a complete meditation that reveals how impermanence and dissatisfaction and selflessness pervade every moment. That same meditation can be used for other postures: sitting, standing, lying down. And maintaining a mindfulness of posture is a really good throughout the day thing to do. It trains the mind to see clearly the characteristics of the aggregates. We're paying attention as the body is lifting, moving, placing, sitting, standing. We can notice those ever-changing parts and processes, like when we talked about the 32 parts of the body. There are these always changing parts. And then we also notice the pleasant and the unpleasant emotional feelings that come from our own attitude. So we can sort of stop blaming others. And this whole cycle of suffering is powered by the mind's, at that current time, unenlightened reactions to these 3 kinds of feelings. We grasp at pleasant feelings, we reject unpleasant ones, and we experience these deluded sense of self sometimes in neutral ones. We just can't see ourselves. We don't know where we are. And we talked about worldly feelings from, the mundane pursuits that have these underlying tendencies toward greed and hatred and delusion, and the unworldly feelings that arise from insight and lack of those underlying tendencies. So mindfulness of feelings is part of our ordinary insight meditation practice, and seeing the impermanence of feelings, we can learn to let go of these underlying tendencies of greed and hatred and delusion. And the Buddha didn't teach us to mindfully enjoy sense pleasures. he taught us to mindfully let go of desires for pleasurable worldly feelings and to enjoy the pleasant unworldly feelings created by this letting go, which is kind of hardcore, but it's how we can reach that freedom, is by observing what happens when we have desire for pleasurable worldly feelings and what happens when we let go of some of those worldly feelings and notice the pleasant arising of the unworldly feelings. So when we cultivate, hang on, Sherry, I'll just finish this sentence. When we cultivate mindfulness of mind, we notice the rising and the falling of the mental states like greed and non-greed, and states of the mind contracted and expanded, and so on and so forth. So the mindfulness of mental objects, noticing the arising and falling away of these things, of the hindrances and the 10 fetters and the 5 aggregates, and noticing factors of enlightenment. Those are sort of the fruits of our mindfulness practice. And as it deepens, they can arise. And we can notice those in our practice of mindfulness is arising, investigation is arising, energy and joy and tranquility and concentration. So all of these factors of enlightenment have been, when they've been perfected, one can achieve complete freedom, perfect happiness and peace. And it's a goal within this life. It takes effort, but it's a goal within this life. So that's sort of a wrap up of those 8 mindful steps to happiness, of the way of some key points out of the chapter on practicing of skillful mindfulness. So we can talk about it. But I think I should turn on my overhead light because